Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presentation on the EPA CDX-CEDRI system for electronic compliance reporting. I'm going to go ahead and get started here because it's now a minute after 2, and we've got quite a few slides to get through. Due to the large number of attendees today, we're not going to be able to open up the lines and actually allow for questions because we think that would be a little chaotic towards the end. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the question window in your GoToWebinar screen, and we'll take time for a few at the very end. Again, we probably cannot open up the lines for questions until the end, and probably will not have time to stop and answer them as we go through. But hopefully, anything that I don't answer during the presentation, I'll be sure to follow up. I think today's going to be a very enjoyable presentation, and I hope everyone out there will enjoy it. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right in. So EPA CDX-CEDRI system and current proposed electronic compliance reporting requirements. The key thing that's important about this is the new system has the potential to significantly change how your facility or facilities completes compliance reporting under several different rules. So to kind of go through the system, we're gonna first start off by going through the basics of what is CEDRI, what is CDX, and there's people out there who actually pronounce it CEDRI, but because I'm from the South, I'm going to pronounce it CEDRI. So that's something just to keep in mind. We'll go through some of the currently applicable rules and how to determine if your facility is subject to current electronic reporting requirements using the system. We'll go through the basics of how to use the system and how to register. We'll go through completing submittals in CEDRI. And also tips and other things that we've learned along the way from having to do this reporting for a few different folks. And then we're going to talk about kind of some of the hot topics and regulatory developments and potential impacts that are to come because of different rules proposed by EPA. So for some of you that have already used the system, there might be a little bit of a refresher, but I think it'll be good to kind of go over the big picture of when this is applicable, as well as how to actually use the system. And hopefully your facility can be prepared and be aware of these upcoming requirements and new challenges. So EPA continues to propose rules that require electronic reporting. And these generally affect both new source performance standards, or NSPS, and MAC standards, or National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutant Standard. And the rules can require a variety of different things that could be submitted. And these could include source test results using the electronic reporting tool, emissions monitoring data and compliance reports, as well as notification of compliance status, which if you're not familiar with that one, that's kind of an initial notification where you demonstrate that you are, or your facility is in compliance with a rule. The biggest challenge, again, is that these rules may fundamentally change how you complete reporting, and I would expect any facility that's subject to a rule that requires electronic reporting to see at least an initial increase in effort required for reporting at the beginning. Ideally, EPA thinks that electronic reporting over time should save facilities money and cost, but we'll go through some of the challenges that a lot of facilities are facing using the programs now. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So the CEDRI stands for Compliance and Emissions Data Reporting Interface, and it's located on US EPA's Central Data Exchange. Those of you that have submitted a Toxic Release Inventory, or TRI, have probably already used the CDX. EGRID also has an abbreviated registration process through CDX. The CEDRI system, the whole idea is that you can submit multiple reports at a time in what they call a package. So it's just kind of like a, if you're mailing something in with multiple documents in it, it's almost think of it like a literal package. It allows you to put them all there, and then it allows you to submit the package and sign the package and certify the package using the Chrome Air service, which is promulgated into the regs as well. So again, this is supposed to ideally simplify the compilation of reports and submittal of reports electronically. Once you submit a report in the CEDRI system, it's initially available to the submitter as well as agency personnel for review. And eventually, the reports are uploaded into WebFire where the public can view them. But what's nice about CEDRI is it can serve as a potential repository for your reports, and you can always have proof that you submitted them, although I would always recommend that you maintain them on site. So here's kind of a diagram of the process. Your different reports may be a source test or compliance status report, goes into the system again, and it's stored there, and it can be accessed by a regulatory agency for review, and eventually by the public. So keep that in mind. What you submit in CEDRI eventually becomes accessible to the public from the internet. If you live in a state where there's not a lot of electronic reporting or not a lot of files kept online, it might be a significant change for you, because I know, for instance, here in Georgia, if you wanted to look at a compliance report for a facility, you would have to go to the EPD office and go pull the report. Whereas now with this system, the public will be able to access that compliance report, that source test, or notification of compliance status once it's submitted. The key considerations for what you should be thinking about with the CEDRI system, how do I know if I'm subject to a rule that requires CEDRI reporting? How do I know what the rule requires to be submitted? Because what we'll find out is all the rules specify different submittal requirements. And so you really do have to actually read each individual rule to figure out what you're going to have to submit. We'll also go through how to register and make sure your certifier is registered, how to submit the necessary reports, including performance tests, SIMS, relative accuracy test audit reports, notification of compliance status and compliance reports. We'll go through that. And other things to think about, how do I ensure that my regular reports I'm submitting to my state or local agency, maybe on paper, are consistent with what I'm submitting electronically in the CEDRI system. And the other thing to watch out for is, how do I know what's on the horizon? How do I know how my requirements might change in the future? So the first question, am I subject to a rule with electronic reporting requirements? The only way to really confirm this is to actually review the specific regulations your facility is subject to. EPA is over time amending individual NESHAP and NSPS rules, and to some extent the general provisions, as we'll talk about later, that could directly impact you. So anytime you see a rule your facility is subject to is open for amendment, you might want to verify that EPA didn't slip in a electronic compliance reporting requirement. EPA actually maintains a list on the ERT website of rules with electronic reporting requirements, but in my experience, the list is not always up to date immediately. It does take them some time to update it. So again, you want to look for those rule amendments so that you know when a rule you're subject to has had an electronic reporting requirement added. So here's just the brief list that's up on EPA's website of rules that have electronic reporting requirements. I'll just hold this up here for a second. Again, you may see a rule that your facility is subject to on this list, but that does not necessarily mean that you have a electronic reporting obligation. You'll find that within some rules there are electronic reporting requirements that only apply to a subset of sources. Here's the continuation of that list and the electronic reporting requirements. So again, you have to look individually at each rule to figure out what electronic reporting requirements apply. The next consideration, so you figure out that you're subject to a rule that has electronic reporting requirements. What do I actually need to submit? Do I have to submit my performance test results, my monitoring data? Again, not all rules have the same requirements. For instance, major source boiler MAC and area source boiler MAC have slightly different requirements for electronic submittal, and we've actually seen a lot of questions, a lot of confusion over this, just because they're, you would think that if it was required, if a report was required under the area source rule, it would also be required under the major source rule, and that's not necessarily true. So that's something that we've seen. Again, it comes down to individual reg review to determine what reporting requirements apply. And just keep in mind that different units, 2 different boilers under boiler MAC could have different electronic reporting requirements. Again, this is not CEDRI is not intended to be a sweeping change where all of your compliance, all your state compliance reports are suddenly going to go in electronically. It really is rule by rule, unit by unit assessment. A couple of the common rules that have electronic reporting requirements. Area source boiler MAC requires submittal of a notification of compliance status as well as performance tests and RADA using the ERT. Major source boiler MAC does not require the NOCS, but EPA has strongly recommended that you submit the NOCS in that system. Additionally, compliance reports under major source boiler MAC is something that's required that's not under area source. So we actually get a lot of questions on this, but that's something that you really do have to look through rule by rule. Again, I can't stress that enough. Other rules with electronic reporting requirements, you'll see NSPS, DA, DB, and DC. And most of you will say, oh, well, or a good portion of you will say, well, I actually have a NSPS, DA, DB, or DC boiler at my site. Did I miss something? And the answer is probably not. EPA added in a requirement for boilers with PM SIMs that are required under those rules or utilized to demonstrate compliance with those rules to submit the RADA reports. And they also added in an optional electronic emission report submittal under DA and DB. But again, most units, in my experience, do not currently have electronic reporting requirement under any of the boiler NSPSs or boiler new source performance standards. The RICE MAC, or the reciprocating internal combustion engine hazardous air pollutant standard, does have, and as well as the new source performance standard for stationary engines, have some electronic reporting requirements in them, but they're specifically for emergency demand response engines. And EPA guidance moving forward is that report's not going to be required because we've had a recent court ruling that vacated some of the demand response provisions. The other complication with the requirements of the rule is that there are certain cases where a rule will require you to submit the results of a performance test, but EPA has not configured the electronic reporting tool, which we'll go into what that is a little bit later, to accept results for that test method. there are only certain supported methods that can be submitted in the ERT. There might be a case where your rule says you need to submit this performance test for this pollutant using the ERT in CEDRI, but the ERT is not configured to accept that test method. So it does get a little bit more complicated, and we have seen that. In cases where an electronic submittal to EPA using the ERT and CEDRI is required, and the test method's not available, EPA will ask that you submit that hard copy. Again, we will talk about what the ERT is. I just wanted to let you know that when you come in and think you're going to answer this question about what test reports should I submit or what do I have to do, that question can be a little more complicated. So we'll go into the basics of getting started with CEDRI. In order to use the Central Data Exchange and CEDRI, you need to have, of course, an email, an updated web browser, internet access, and a fairly recent version of Adobe Acrobat. Most people should have that installed on your computers, but there are some minimum technology requirements to properly use the system. I have run into folks before that, at least for the Try.me system, where their computers were not, or their browser was not up to date enough to use that. But there are some minimum software requirements that you need to have in order to use the system. Creating an account in CDX-CEDRI, I think it's relatively easy. You can create an account at cdx.epa.gov. CEDRI, again, is added as a program service within the Central Data Exchange, so you will need to click and add it after you've created your account. A few tips on registration in CEDRI. So after you create your account in CDX, basically you'll enter some basic information, choose your role, which we'll talk about, associate your facility, and if you're a certifier, you verify your identity, and after that, you're basically good to go. I don't actually think that the registration process is too complicated, but we do occasionally see people that have challenges or deal with plant managers that may have some challenges with actually registering with the system. So we do occasionally get questions on it. Usually my answer is always try to register well in advance of any report that might be due, and just be patient. And if you have registration issues, EPA's CDX help desk is always a good resource to reach out to. So after you've created your CDX account, or if you already have one and you add your program service, you have to register in CEDRI as either a certifier or preparer. The preparer is the person that prepares the reports, and could be a contractor or consultant. The certifier is the responsible official or duly authorized representative of the facility who is authorized to sign and submit reports for that facility. After you select what your role is going to be in CEDRI, you go and add your facility to the system. And here's just a quick screenshot of what the facility search options look like. You may need, in some cases, you may need to add your facility, or you may find that there are multiple entries for your facility. So it can get a little confusing, but it is relatively straightforward. If your facility was added under another program service in CDX, it likely is already here, but I'm not sure that it will definitely be there. After you've logged into CDX, you're added your CEDRI program service and selected your role and facilities, you're then prompted to enter a lot of detailed user information, including security questions. You're also required to add an organization. In context of the CEDRI system, your organization is generally your employer, and you follow the steps through the system to confirm your registration. And if you're a preparer, this is basically where the registration process ends. But if you're a certifier or someone who certifies reports, you have to go through an additional step to register as a certifier. EPA allows two options to register as a certifier to verify your identity. You can either use their LexisNexis electronic identity verification, where you provide information and they use a database and verify that you are who you say you are, or you can use their electronic signature agreement signing process. The difference is the LexisNexis you can do on your computer, and the ESA you actually print out a form, sign it, and mail it in to EPA. Generally takes EPA up to 2 weeks to complete. I wouldn't submit an ESA or try to register. I try to register at least probably 6 weeks before I had a report due. I wouldn't want to push it close to the limit. So you want to make sure you can get this done. A couple of things we've learned about certifier registration, just kind of tips. You have to, if you have to have a U.S. Social Security number and home address to use the LexisNexis identity verification. We've seen with some foreign-owned companies that occasionally, if their RO is based in another country, that the system will not allow you to verify your identity that way. Usually, you have to have somebody in the U.S. But I have seen people try to register foreign responsible officials, and that will not work in the LexisNexis system. The other funny story I have about certifier registration is we had a plant manager who goes by his middle name normally at work. We had the EPA actually call the plant to verify that that plant manager worked there, and the person answering the phone didn't recognize the name because they gave their first name instead of their middle name, which is what they normally go by. So we had an interesting source of confusion around that. So EPA does actually reach out to these facilities and occasionally and verify certifier identities. So you do have to make sure that, I guess that middle name, first name thing is hard to avoid, but that did happen. So just a couple of things to watch out for. Again, set this up way in advance of before you have any report due is the recommendation. For those of you that already have CDX accounts, you can add program services through your My Profile or My CDX screen once you log in. You can also use Add Program Service to add CEDRI, and you can use the Manage Program Service if you already have CEDRI to add facilities or organizations or to your account. In some cases, the certifier, if they're approved under other CDX programs, they may be automatically approved under CEDRI, and you may not have to go through the certification process that I mentioned. Again, I would recommend that you try to get this done well in advance and see if the system allows you to register someone as a certifier. So how do you actually prepare reports and packages? Once you log in to CDX, you just simply find the program service, which is, again, CEDRI, and click on your role, and that'll take you to the pending submissions or packages page to either edit or begin a new package. Here's just a quick screenshot of that. Again, in CEDRI, everything that's submitted is submitted as a package, which could consist of one or more reports. Right now, there are 3 different types of reports in CEDRI. There's performance test reports, which those summarize, like they sound, they summarize results for performance test, and they actually also summarize relative accuracy test audit data for SIMs or continuous emission monitors. To submit a performance test report, you actually input test data into the electronic reporting tool, which we'll talk about. You generate a test data file that is then uploaded into the system. That's kind of the mechanics of how the performance test report works. Again, we'll get into a little bit more detail about all of these reports. Notification reports, or NSPS, are reports that demonstrate the facility's achieved initial compliance with an applicable rule. And these reports, depending on the rule, could be an online form, a PDF file, or some other upload to the system. It really is rule specific about what format the NOCS will go in. And often it's not identified directly in the reg, the format of the NOCS. It'll just say submit in CEDRI, and you often have to just log in, start the report, and see what the system wants you to submit for that particular rule or what format they want. That's just how it's been in our experience. For instance, right now, for area source boiler MAC, you can just log in and fill out a form to complete your NOCS, which hopefully you've already done, unless you have a new unit. But for other rules, it might be a PDF upload or something. Air emissions reports, the name of this one always gets confused because a lot of people refer to these as excess emission reports or monitoring reports or CMS reports. But these are really, when you hear the term air emissions report, think compliance and monitoring report, similar to what you might submit to a state agency. Again, the format for the air emissions reports really does vary rule by rule. So it's important to before you don't think you're just going to log in one day and do the report real quickly. It's just like any compliance report you do. You want to make sure you spend adequate time in preparing for that format and everything. So let's talk about the electronic reporting tool. Again, this is the tool that's used to submit performance test results in CEDRI. The whole idea behind the ERT is that EPA it would allow you to submit a test plan to an agency and after approval calculate and submit test results as an electronic report. A lot of rules that I've seen don't actually require the test plan submittal in CEDRI specifically, and I'm not really aware of how common that is to actually use that for the test plan. A lot of rules require the actual results only, but it is something to be aware of. The electronic reporting tool is a Microsoft Access-based program that can be downloaded from EPA's website or the ERT website. So the whole idea is if you were going to do this yourself, you would get your performance test or RADA data. You would download the ERT tool, enter data into the tool, generate a ERT file, which is usually in .zip format, which consists of the test data, and then that file would be uploaded into CEDRI. So the actual interface with CEDRI for these performance test reports is relatively straightforward. It's the interface with the ERT that's really the challenge and where you'll spend most of your effort. So again, you manually enter data into the ERT. And again, this is not something that you can complete quickly. It's not just, you're not just going to log in or open up the program and enter, how many pounds per hour you emitted. This is a very detailed tool that requires a lot of manual data entry to complete. So you need to make sure that you allocate time or that you ask your stack tester or consultant to fill in this information for you in the electronic reporting tool. Do not expect that this will be a quick endeavor whatsoever. It does actually take a lot of time and a lot of data entry. And I would recommend, if anyone's going to try to do this themselves, that they make sure that they can get the ERT program to correctly download and open on their computer, because we've seen a lot of sort of bugs with it. Some helpful hints for the ERT before we jump into some screenshots and other things. The tool is actually updated fairly frequently, so it's important that you make sure you're using the current version of the tool. For instance, I believe it was updated again at the beginning of May, and I think before that only a couple of months previously. Other tips, make sure you enable macros after you open the program. Remember, it's access-based, so a lot of times people have security settings on their Microsoft Office products to not automatically enable macros, but it is something you'll have to do. In my experience, the program has been fairly buggy and can occasionally crash. So I have heard of some folks with a lot of frustration with it. I know EPA is continuing to improve the program and release new versions, so hopefully over time those bugs will be fixed. I've personally had a lot of difficulty opening ERT files that are completed by others, so it has been a little bit challenging to use. The other thing to watch out for is, for those of you used to nice, clean stack test reports, paper stack test reports that your stack tester gives you, do not expect that the PDF preview function in the ERT will look very clean. Over time, I know it's improving, but when we've seen reports that have been prepared in the ERT, a lot of times the PDF preview version can look sloppy or look like it has incorrect information in it. And again, I know EPA is working to try to make it as good as they can. The other thing to keep in mind, just because the rule you're submitting the report for says that you need to submit it electronically, that does not automatically exclude you from providing your state or local agency a hard copy test report. I know here in Georgia, from talking to Georgia EPD, they have specifically said that they want to continue to receive hard copy test reports, just because in their procedures they review them. They review the hard copy version, and they like to use spreadsheets to review their reports, and they're just not comfortable using the ERT yet. So often you will be submitting this electronic report as well as a hard copy report to your state or local agency. Basically, until your state or local agency tells you not to submit paper reports, I would continue to do that if that's their normal format for how they receive performance tests and RADA reports. So the ERT main menu, again, this is a access-based program. If you've ever dealt with access forms, this might look a little bit familiar. The main menu allows you to jump to different places in the test plan or test data, and allows you to print reports and open up different data sets. And there are different checks you can do, a lot of different information that has to go into the report. You can see here, I've got a fake test plan that I've started in the ERT. There's a lot of basic information that goes under this tab, but you can see there's several other tabs where you detail methods, regulations, information about your process, calibrations, and different review items. On the locations methods tab, you do have to enter some specific information about the number of test runs, how long the test runs were, information about your stack testing ports, diameters, and several different items. Again, this is a relatively detailed tool, and it will require a good amount of manual data entry to actually complete. for this each stack test run, you're required to enter a lot of the information. You can see a lot of the general calibration, filter information, just different stack test information that you would normally see in a detailed or full version of a stack test report. Again, it is fairly detailed. Another screenshot of the different types of data that are required in the ERT here, and here's some more on process data that you would need to provide as part of your stack test submittal using the ERT and CEDRI. That, again, lots and lots of data that has to go in here. Here's the ERT report preview. You can see kind of what it would generally look at. We've got kind of some fake information plugged in here, but this allows you to kind of print and maybe review the test report by hand. But I know that the capabilities of this feature have changed over time and gotten a little bit better, but I'm not 100% sure that they're bug-free at this point. Again, you can print. This is still part of that planner report that you can print out from the ERT tool. So after you've entered all of your stack test data into the tool, which again, the tool is something that you download onto your computer, you enter the data. Once you've entered all the data, passed your checks, you can go to the step to create your ERT submittal file, which again is a zip file that you'd upload to CEDRI. You'll see at the bottom there's some optional steps to email the submission file. In general, you're not going to be emailing the file to anyone. It is, again, it's an upload directly in CEDRI. EPA does have some confidentiality procedures in place in case you don't want to provide all of the, in case your stack test data for some reason has confidential information in it. So once you have completed the ERT, created the file, you log into CEDRI. You can create a package for your test report. You associate your package with your facility. That's an important step because that allows other people that are associated with the facility to see the package you're working on. You associate it with the applicable rule that you're submitting the report for, although you may have also entered that information into the ERT. And then you select the specific report under each rule that you're submitting the report for. So in this case, if we were completing a report for a boiler subject to major source boiler MAC that had a performance test and a SIMS RADA, we could easily log in, associate the report files with the results performance test and SIMS performance evaluation test, upload the files here. It's important, again, that everything you submit in CEDRI is associated with a specific rule, so this step's important to make sure that the test report goes in correctly. And again, you could, in some cases, have a performance test report that could be relevant for multiple rules. It really depends on the situation. So once you've selected your reports and hit next, the CEDRI system will allow you to go into the upload menu, where you basically click on the upload box, which is in the top left, and the file upload box in the bottom right will show up. Select the file from your computer and upload it. Again, this part's pretty straightforward compared to all the manual data entry that you've already would have completed by now if you were filling out the report in the ERT. So that's the basics of the ERT report. Again, you can see that it's not an inconsequential amount of effort, and you want to make sure that you get this started well in advance of any deadline to submit the performance test report or RADA report. it's not something that you're going to turn around in 30 minutes. It is something that you're going to need to do and think about. You know, a lot of folks, I recommend that they include, when they ask their stack tester for a quote to do stack testing, I often recommend that they ask the stack tester to include the cost of preparing the ERT file, because it might not be something that you want to be doing yourself, especially if you're not familiar with all the ins and outs of stack testing. It's definitely something you want to think about having done well in advance. So anyway, we'll move on to the notification reports, or notification of compliance status reports, which again are used to show that you've demonstrated initial compliance with a particular rule. The notification reports can vary in format, as I said earlier, based on which rule you're submitting under. In some cases, it could be a form. In other cases, you could use XML or use a Microsoft Excel to do a bulk upload of notification reports for multiple facilities. Some subparts only allow a PDF upload. In those cases, that's essentially you could write a letter version of your notification of compliance status, sign it, and upload it here. Although, as someone I think pointed out, the signature may be a little redundant in that case, since the Chrome Air is considered a signature itself. The notification reports, if you were going to do a notification of compliance status report under the Area Source Boiler MAC, so you had a boiler subject to Area Source Boiler MAC, and that boiler was required to do a notification of compliance status, you would need to log into CEDRI, start a package, select the rule, which is 40 CFR, Part 63, Subpart 6J, and then select the report that you want to submit. So that drop down that says Select Report, you would click it and then select the 63.11225A4VI report, and it would show up below, like you can see there. To access the report, in this case, it's a form report, so you would click Create Edit Forms. Then another pop-up box would appear where you would enter the detailed information requested in the form. So again, it's just like filling out an online form, but it is a notification of compliance status report. So it's detailed information on the methods used to determine compliance and a few other things. Other versions of the notification report, there's also an Excel version of this where you could fill in information for multiple boilers. For instance, this is an Area Source Boiler MAC 1, so multiple boilers in this case. But there may be cases where the NOCS could be submitted as a bulk upload for a lot of different facilities in Excel. PDF reports, again, this is where I talked about sometimes EPA hasn't developed a form or an Excel file or a XML template for notification of compliance status reports. In the cases that those don't apply, they usually have a PDF upload option. So generally, what we've done to comply with those requirements is to actually write a notification of compliance status letter and upload it. The question might come up, what goes into notification of compliance status? Again, that is specific to the rule that you're complying with, so that may be, in some rules, there are specific things that are directly listed in the rule that need to go in. In other cases, you may refer to the general provisions. So for instance, if it's a niche app, you might refer to 40 CFR 63 subpart A to find what goes in the notification of compliance status. It really is rule specific about what goes in here. Air emission reports, again, this is where I say think your compliance or monitoring reports. In some cases, a lot of the reports are going to look just like a state monitoring form that you may submit, where you detail excess emission events and monitoring performance system status. Again, these reports, the format can vary depending on the subpart. Often there are forms that can be used, and what we've seen so far, at least with major source boiler MAC, for units that do have continuous monitoring systems they use to demonstrate compliance, there are forms that include a lot of the information already set up, so you don't have to, come up with a long letter format. But other subparts may only allow a PDF upload. There are some XML and bulk upload forms available for different rules to do these reports. It really just depends on the rules. And also, the other thing that I'd point out is that what is an available type of format that you can submit can change over time. So EPA might not have a form right now for a particular rule, but they might add it later, or they might add an XML template or Excel template later, and you can complete the air emissions reports that way. Let's see. The next, we'll kind of go through some of the forms right now. The air emissions report form that you can see up here right now, this is where you enter some basic monitoring information for a SIMS or continuous monitoring system. If you've filled out a state monitoring form, you might have seen something similar to this before. So basically, you start out on the welcome page for the form for the air emissions report, and you follow the steps through to fill out the form. A lot of new rules will actually require that you submit actual SIMS data averages in the air emissions report, which might be something you're not really used to doing. And under a lot of rules, you might have had to identify excess emissions periods, but not necessarily provide numerical values for every average. Under Boiler Act, under the Major Source Boiler Act, if you're complying using a CO SIMS, for instance, you actually have to provide each 30-day average CO value during the reporting period. So there is some detailed numbers and things that you actually do have to provide when you're filling out the air emissions report. Again, right now EPA is adding templates. These are the Major Source Boiler Act templates, so they are adding templates over time where you can upload, you can use to kind of upload this information. Personally, I actually use the forms a lot when I'm completing these reports for now, just because we haven't, in cases where you're only reporting for one unit and not doing 15 units or something like that in a report, sometimes it's just easier visually to check against the form than it is against a spreadsheet. Again, these templates do change over time. And another thing to keep in mind, if you do log in and there is no form or XML available, there are a lot of cases where a PDF report could be uploaded, and you may just follow through with a form. So this is kind of a quasi-combination of submitting a report via form and PDF. Boilers, right now, if you have a major source boiler under the Major Source Boiler Act rule, it's only subject to the requirements of a tune-up. Your option for a compliance report right now is to upload a PDF, but that may change over time. So again, in cases where CEDRI has only allowed us to upload a PDF for an air emissions or compliance report, we basically have created a Word template that we update in PDF and upload for every compliance period. And this might be something you want to consider if there is no form available. This is just kind of an example of a template we use for Major Source Boiler Act annual compliance reports for boilers subject to a tune-up. where we lay out the specific information required by the rule and upload a PDF report that contains all that information. So now we've kind of gone through how we would actually fill out a report and the different formats that those reports might come in. After you actually fill out your report or upload your test file or upload your NOCS data, you've got to go through the submittal steps. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't have to have an individual package for every report. You can submit multiple reports in one package. Keep in mind that only the certifier can actually submit the packages. Again, preparers cannot actually submit them. The key steps for your certifier to keep it easy, you basically just have them log in, and if everyone is associated with the correct facility and the reports that you're going to submit are associated with the correct facility, the certifier should just be able to log in and select the package under pending submissions, click submit, enter some passwords and security question answers, and then sign and submit the report. In my experience, it's always toughest for the certifier to do it the first time, but after that they get fairly used to it. It is actually relatively easy as long as you have your password and security questions answers handy and don't forget them. So it might be a good idea to write those down somewhere. After you submit, so after your certifier logs in, clicks the package, hits submit, then CEDRI will actually process the package and the certifier should receive a confirmation email. Anything that you submit in CEDRI, you should immediately be able to see in your CEDRI history as a submitted file. Again, the files that are submitted are not immediately available to the public, so you won't be able to download it off a public website immediately. Things we've run across with preparing the different CEDRI reports. Don't assume that EPAs prepared an appropriate reporting form for each rule. We've actually come across cases where a report form in CEDRI does not have a place to put all of the information that's specifically listed to be reported in the rule. So in those cases, we've either added additional information. This is only true really for form versions of compliance reports is where we've seen this. So you fill out the form, you look at what the rule requires, and you figure out that there's some things that the rule requires that the form does not specifically ask for. In those cases, we've actually uploaded an additional document or provided a comment in the additional information section of the form, which are generally present in the EPA CEDRI forms to kind of cover ourselves and make sure that we're reporting everything that we're supposed to be. The thing to keep in mind here is that the people that actually write the rules and the people that design the CEDRI system are usually not the same person. So when a new rule comes out, there could be some instances where a minor piece of information that the rule says you need to report isn't actually covered by the form that was developed. So I would pay a careful attention to that. We've also seen in some cases forms ask for information that's not specifically required by a rule. And in those cases, we've actually commented and said, sorry, we're not going to submit because the rule doesn't actually require us to provide this information. Again, those have come up very rarely, and of course I phrase it in nicer words than that. My recommendation is that when you prepare the report the first time, you look at what information you're providing, again, look at what the rule requires, and make sure that they line up. One issue we used to run across with boiler mat compliance reports early on, which we were assisting with a new boiler under the rule that's already been subject to it for a couple of years, is that in one of the forms they require you to submit your fuel usage during the compliance period. We were actually preparing this report for a biomass boiler, and we logged in to the fuel form, which had a drop-down menu for the type of fuel, and biomass was not an option that we could select. the only options we could select were coal and oil. So in that case, we had to call the CDX help desk to get them to add biomass as a fuel in the form so that we could complete the report. The CDX help desk has been fairly responsive to corrections or simple issues with the system and its forms. So that has been very good to see and really helpful for allowing us to submit sometimes with these confusing forms. Another thing I'll recommend is with anything you do with any computer program or on the internet is to hit save frequently. You definitely don't want to spend a lot of time entering information just to have it all lost. So make sure you're hitting save frequently. Additional tips on CEDRI reports, make sure that if a rule requires an electronic submittal, don't assume that you do not have a state obligation to your state or local agency to submit that report hard copy. My understanding is that reports are required hard copy basically until you're told otherwise. And the challenge that you might see immediately with CEDRI is that you have several different, you have a facility subject to several different regulations. You have several different units at your facility, but only a small portion of the facility's overall compliance report goes in electronically. In those cases, your compliance engineer at the state likely still wants the hard copy, especially if only 1% of your total reporting obligation goes in electronically. Unfortunately, in the short term, my personal belief is that many facilities are actually going to be duplicating effort when they go to do compliance reports because they're still going to have an obligation to their state agency or local agency to provide information on paper, but they also have an obligation to EPA to provide it electronically. So in some cases, you might be filling out a state monitoring form and a CEDRI monitoring form for the same parameter for the same unit. It really just depends. And we'll talk about some other considerations with how to efficiently prepare reports a little bit later. Again, have your certifier approved well in advance so that you can actually submit the report, and make sure that you link the report that you're preparing with your facility. There's a drop-down menu when you go to prepare the reports. If you don't link the report with the facility, others associated with the facility can't see the report when they log in on their own accounts. The other thing that I would watch out for is CEDRI forms do change frequently. Different forms and templates are added by EPA, and there's not really a notice mechanism for the different forms, so it is something to watch out for. Again, you'll want to get started well in advance of any deadlines so that you can look out for these types of changes. Especially with new rules that are coming into play, you want to be up to speed on it. Things to think about for your facility. If you're providing reports electronically and on hard copy, how do you know that you're providing consistent information? Obviously, you wouldn't want to report one thing in an electronic reporting form and then something else on your state paper monitoring form. So you will have to look at this and make sure that you have some consistency between what you're submitting. In some cases, some of the CEDRI forms can actually be printed out, and you might be able to talk your state or local agency into accepting a just printout of the CEDRI system rather than a state monitoring form. It really will take some dialogue. The other thing to think about is how can I automate my process of preparing my compliance reports and compliance reporting and monitoring data so that I ensure this consistency. Again, it's very important that your data is consistent. One thing we see a lot is now all my monitoring data for my site is going online, so it is very easy for the public to access it. Again, a lot of states don't require that you provide electronic reports, but In some cases, that means that the public would actually have to go down to the agency to get the report. This is going to open up the ability of the public to see reports and see how your facility is doing with respect to compliance. One thing I mentioned earlier, that under Boiler MAC, you actually do upload numerical SIMS data values into the system, major source Boiler MAC, I mean. If you have an emissions exceedance, there's not really an ability to comment directly next to that numerical value on that form where you're reporting the exceedances. So if John Q. Public sees that exceedance, they're not going to see any context around it or know if you had a valid reason for an emissions exceedance, or you had some error with your monitor or something. I do think that this system will potentially increase some compliance risk for facilities. My recommendation, if you do have an excursion or excess emission event, of course, is to comment in your report that explains what happened and what corrective actions you took to take care of it. And generally, that is something that's required in most rules now, but I can't stress that enough. Other considerations for your facility: don't expect that your reports, the amount of time it's going to take you to do your compliance reporting or your performance test reports, are going to immediately go down. The whole idea, or EPA's idea, is that reporting will become more efficient with the use of an electronic system over time, but I can tell you from experience, in the short term, you will see an increase in effort for completing your compliance reports. Again, and from talking to different agencies, a lot of them are hesitant to start taking electronic reports. So we've kind of mentioned that duplicative effort idea a couple of times now, but I wouldn't expect that the effort required would go down. Just something to keep in mind for when you're planning for future years. If you know electronic reporting is coming, it is something that you do have to spend time reviewing rules, reviewing the forms, and making sure that you're doing correctly. So a lot of questions we get are what's the eventual impact for facilities? EPA's goal is to eventually require electronic reporting for new source performance standards and NSPS rules for compliance reports, performance test reports. And this, again, the whole idea is to make things more transparent, allow easier access to compliance data. EPA can use a couple of different regulatory mechanisms to require electronic reporting. They can modify individual rules when they're open for amendment to add electronic reporting requirements, or they can make wholesale changes to the general provisions of the specific NSPS or NSPS standards. And those wholesale changes are very important to pay attention to, and we'll talk about the one that's on the horizon right now. The key for your facility is to be aware of regulatory developments and changes to different general provisions. This is kind of the direction we're going, though, where NSPS and NSPS reports have to be submitted. We'll talk a little bit right now about the proposed new source performance standard rule. This rule modifies the general provisions in several individual new source performance standard subparts, or as proposed it would. It was originally proposed last year in March, and you can see a version of that in the Federal Register. It specifies specific reports under these rules that would have to be submitted electronically. EPA is quick to clarify, though, that this rule does not actually add any additional reporting requirements, it just makes the reporting requirements electronic if it's promulgated as proposed. The key thing to keep in mind is just because your facility has a new source performance standard does not automatically mean that this rule would result in your facility having an electronic reporting requirement. There are examples where you may not have a reporting obligation under a specific new source performance standard, so this may not affect a particular piece of equipment. There are, and remember, just because your individual, the other way to look at it though is just because your individual subpart isn't amended, EPA is amending the general provisions, so it could have an impact on specific NSPS subparts your facility complies with. The comment period actually ended a year ago today for this rule, and I believe EPA is looking at the fall for finalization, maybe September is what I've kind of heard. EPA believes that the rule is going to save facilities $300,000 nationwide a year, which I know a lot of people are a little bit skeptical of. Here's a list of the new source performance standards that would be affected by this proposed rule. Again, you have to review each individual subpart and the requirements of the subpart to actually figure out what your reporting obligation might be. You'll see a couple of the new source performance standards for gas turbines. You'll see some of the new source performance standards for stationary engines and a lot of various ones. Subparts that are not affected by the proposed rule are listed here. You'll see the boiler subparts are not specifically identified as affected under the proposed rule. EPA is planning to review and assess electronic reporting requirements under other NSPSs under a separate rulemaking. So just be aware that just because you're not flagged in the initial rule doesn't mean that it's not coming. The key changes that are proposed under this rule for the new source performance standards, requirement to submit continuous monitoring system, excess emission and monitoring system performance reports, requirements to submit all performance tests and RADA required by a specific NSPS. The requirement, those are the two main ones. You can see here we've also got some options for submittal of confidential information that are being added to NSPS Subpart A. Again, earlier I mentioned that the ERT may not be configured for all, well, I should say is not configured for all test methods. So in the case that you have an electronic reporting requirement for a performance test and the ERT is not configured to accept that test method, you do, the rule does specify that that would still go in by mail, and that could apply to a RADA or a performance test. The NSPS Subpart A changes also clarify that electronic submittals of reports in the CDX covers you for any EPA submittal requirements. Again, the rule does specifically say that facilities would still need to provide a paper copy to state or local agencies unless the agency requests an alternative format. So again, I can't stress that enough. You still may have a hard copy obligation. Again, in general, if the rule requires an electronic submittal, but there's not a form available in CEDRI or not a way to submit the report, you would submit hard copy. And another thing to keep in mind is that EPA expects that once a form or test method is added for submittal, that facilities would begin submitting using that form no later than 90 days after the form becomes available. So you would potentially have to pay attention to changes to the CEDRI or ERT system to make sure that if for some reason the form wasn't available, that it did not become available later. EPA actually has a updates email list for the ERT, but I'm not aware of one for the actual compliance report forms in CEDRI. The main thing that you should keep in mind is if you have equipment that's subject to a new source performance standard, you need to review what the reporting requirements would be for that piece of equipment on a unit-by-unit basis. Once the rule becomes final, or right now it might be a good idea to go ahead and start looking at this to make sure you understand what the impact is for your facility. Again, this is something that needs to be reviewed on a unit-by-unit basis for units that are emission units that are subject to an NSPS. Again, this rule only covers NSPS-specific requirements. You may have an emission unit, which is often the case, that's subject to state rules or NESHAP or PSD requirements in a permit. This rule does not affect those other requirements. It really is targeted just at the new source performance standards requirement for a specific emission unit. One thing to keep in mind for performance tests, of course, you could have a performance test that's required by a new source performance standard for one pollutant, and you could have another performance test for the same emission unit that's not an NSPS test. That non-NSPS test does not necessarily have to go, would not have to go into the ERT and be submitted in CEDRI if the proposed rule became final. The types of performance tests required under the NSPS general provisions include initial performance tests, tests at frequencies specified in individual subparts, and tests at other times under Section 114 of the Clean Air Act. Basically, what that means is that a performance test any performance test that's specifically identified in a new source performance standard that's covered by the rulemaking would need to go into the CEDRI system. There are a lot of older NSPSs that do not require subsequent performance tests. In those cases, a lot of times state or local agencies might write in a subsequent performance test requirement for that pollutant that is for an emission unit regulated by an NSPS, but that subsequent performance test may not actually be required to be submitted. And I'll go into an example of what that means, since that was kind of a confusing statement in a second here. Again, this rule is targeted at NSPS subparts and only specific requirements that are identified in a subpart. And again, this is just a proposed rule. There are other electronic reporting requirements out there that are currently applicable. I saw somebody ask a question about MAC rules, but there are certain MAC rules that already have these requirements, and then this is a proposed rule to tackle NSPS requirements. This rule, again, it only impacts SIMS systems that are used to demonstrate compliance with a specific subpart. You could, of course, have a SIMS or a CMS that's not related to a NSPS that are not impacted by this rulemaking. Other thing to keep in mind is that your state or local agency could always require electronic submittal beyond what EPA requires, so it's important to communicate with them about any pending changes. Let's give a quick example of how you could evaluate the impact of the proposed rule. We're going to look at a pulp and paper mill with a recovery furnace subject to new source performance standard BB. I picked this one because it's relatively straightforward. This NSPS specifies emission limits for particulate matter and total reduced sulfur compounds. It requires the use of a COMS, or a continuous capacity monitoring system, and a TRS monitor. In this case, this mill has an annual PM test requirement in its Title V permit, and also conducts annual relative accuracy test audits of the TRS SIMS. The rule also requires quarterly, well, the permit for this facility requires quarterly monitoring reports. Key things to keep in mind here for this example, the NSPS general provisions and NSPS BB in this case do not specifically identify annual PM performance testing as an applicable requirement. The rule BB does specify an excess emission report and CMS performance report, however. So let's talk about what would have to go in electronically under this rule. Would I need to submit a PM stack test report? Would I need to submit my TRS SIMS RADA? Because we identified that we have a TRS monitor. How about my comms or my TRS monitoring reports? This rule is actually not proposed to be amended under the this proposed rule, but the general provisions are going to be amended. The first question, would I need to report my future recovery furnace PM stack test electronically? Again, under the new source performance standard, you're only required to conduct an initial performance test at frequency specified in a specific subpart, or tests under 114 of the Clean Air Act. In this case, the mill conducted its initial performance test a long time ago, and NSPS BB does not specify annual performance tests, but the state wrote into the mill's Title V permit that they have to do an annual PM test. Our understanding from conversations with EPA is that that annual PM test would not have to be submitted electronically under this rule. However, the state could require you to do such if they wanted to. EPA considers that subsequent PM test to be a state-required test because it's not specifically identified in a new source performance standard. Would I need to submit my TRS or SIMS relative accuracy test audit reports? The SIMS RADA is a specific requirement identified in the new source performance standard general provisions. Therefore, if the proposed rule becomes final, the mill would need to submit its TRS SIMS RADA electronically. The complication here, though, is right now the ERT cannot accept a TRS SIMS RADA because that method has not been added to the ERT tool. So in this case, if the rule becomes final, this facility would need to pay attention to ERT updates and begin submitting once the ERT can accept that data. Would I need to submit monitoring reports for my TRS, SIMS, and comms? The new source performance standards do require excess emissions and monitoring system performance reports for under some subparts. Therefore, the monitoring report would potentially need to be submitted electronically under this proposed rule. One separate question we might get was, it's a pulp and paper mill that also has a lime kiln. Would the lime kiln, and the lime kiln's equipped with a wet scrubber for PM control, would I need to submit parameter monitoring reports for that lime kiln scrubber? And the answer is yes, that would potentially qualify as a CMS and subject to electronic reporting requirements. Hopefully that example kind of sheds some light. Again, what I'm trying to highlight here is that each individual rule and each individual emission unit would need to be reviewed to determine what reporting requirements apply. And that is something that your facility, I would recommend that you start looking at just to determine what your compliance reporting obligation might be in the future. So to kind of start to wrap up here, where are we going? Again, we're living in a transitional period where EPA is migrating from paper to electronic. We're moving from, in a lot of states, a paper-based compliance system to something electronic. You can only expect that electronic reporting requirements are going to become more and more applicable and cover more and more sources over time. So if you have a facility that's subject to any NESHAP or NSPS, you need to be especially mindful of these changes. The other thing to keep in mind is that state and local agencies may be slow to adapt. Most state agencies that I work with, of course I'm in the Southeast, they deal a lot with paper reports. And so they're used to, their procedures are set up to review hard copy paper test reports, monitoring reports, RADA reports. They're going to have to start to change their procedures if they want to start looking at things electronically. And that might be difficult to do if only a certain small portion, if a small portion of the reports are coming in electronically and still, a large portion are coming in on paper. That may be difficult. You do have to keep in mind that requirements are being added over time, and keep in mind that there will be an interim period, at least for anywhere in the foreseeable future, that you may be submitting both electronic and paper reports. Additional resources, I've got a few links here. You can actually Google a lot of these if you want. CDX.epa.gov has a good, that's the login, and then the user guide, there's a link to it right here, as well as some overview and templates and the ERT and users guide links. The CDX help desk is generally pretty helpful if you need to get in touch with them. Of course, before we move into questions and discussions, I just want to mention that if you need any more information, you can always contact your local Trinity office to discuss what your obligations might be under the new NSPS reporting rule or how to complete reports, of course. I'm always available too. Here's my contact information if you've got any questions specifically about the requirements. A copy of this presentation is going to be made available after this webinar, and we'll also have a recording available on our website. You will have to complete the post-webinar survey in order to get a copy of the presentation. So now I'm going to go through and take a couple of questions that have been submitted using the questions thing. The first one, let's see, I've got is related to Boiler MACT, our major source Boiler MACT. The question is, are there electronic reporting requirements under that rule? And the answer is yes, there are for units subject to emission limits under major source Boiler MACT. You'd be required to submit performance tests, RADAs, and monitoring reports electronically, as well as your notification of, well, actually, sorry, let me correct that. You'd be required to submit performance tests, RADAs, and your compliance monitoring reports if you have a boiler subject to emission limits under Boiler MACT. If you have a boiler subject to only the requirement to submit a tune-up, you do have a annual, biennial, or 5-year electronic compliance reporting obligation under the rule as well. The other question we get a lot is the notification of compliance status. The rule does not specifically identify that the notification of compliance status must be submitted electronically, but EPA has indicated that they recommend that you do that. Let's see. Let's see, other questions we've got. If the state is delegated for NSPS regulations, would you still be, how would you submit that report? If the state, if EPA has delegated the NSPS regulations to the state, yes, you would still have to submit the reports in CEDRI, and you would have to provide a hard copy report if the NSPS rule becomes final. Let's see. We've got some questions on, will the changes to NSPS Subpart A affect semi-annual excess emission and downtime reports? The answer is yes. to that. There will be some changes. Let me see. As someone pointed out, it does seem redundant that a signed statement would be required for the notification of compliance status. I do agree with that. I think that from a regulatory perspective, the system, the submittal process in CEDRI is a electronic signature confirming the accuracy of the report. So I do agree that would be redundant. In some cases, though, we still we write our notification of compliance status letter to the state, sign it, and upload it is what we've done. But I do agree that would be a little redundant. Let me see. You can have, next question, can you have more than one certifier for facility? The answer to that is yes, I believe you can. Let me see. See if we've got a few others. One of the questions was, are there other templates available for uploading performance test data than using the ERT? I know EPA does have some, they have had in the past some WebFire spreadsheet upload templates available for uploading data, but I do believe that you are required now to use the actual ERT submittal file, and they may be adding some capabilities where you can upload spreadsheet data into the ERT to complete that performance test report. Let's see. One question, if my testing vendor fills out my ERT, can I review the information prior to submitting in CEDRI? The answer to that is yes, you can. There's two ways to review it. You could download the ERT on your computer and then upload and open the file the zip file that's provided by your stack tester and click through the actual ERT tool. The other way to review a performance test report from an ERT file would be to have the stack tester send you the PDF preview of the report if you don't want to deal with the download and a little bit of the hassle of the ERT. Let's see. There's a few different specific questions on here, and I'll definitely be following up with some of you after the call. Let's see. There's a few different questions on specific subpart requirements. Those are going to take me a little bit to actually go out and review, because the you do have to review everything on a rule-by-rule basis, and unfortunately I don't work with, or fortunately I don't work with every NSPS and NESHAP out there, so I can't give you an answer on specifics right now without doing a little bit of digging into a specific subpart. Let's see. Someone said they've had issues where they're when they try to associate the facility with their account and the facility is listed in there multiple times. My recommendation for that would probably be to contact the CDX help desk and try to get that issue sorted out. Well, we've reached 3:30, so I'd like to thank you all for attending today's presentation. Again, I will try to follow up with you on your specific ERT or CEDRI questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or give your local Trinity office a call. That 800 number will actually connect you with the office that you're closest to, or you're in that office's region, to answer specific questions. So again, please feel free to reach out to your local Trinity office. We will be sending out a survey. Once you complete the survey, you will be able to receive a copy of the slides from today's presentation. Again, I want to thank you for attending, and good luck with your future electronic reporting and electronic compliance reporting endeavors. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.